So thank you very much for inviting me here today. I'm really excited to be here and also be co-presenting with Susan today. We'll be talking about shade, why it's important, the many co-benefits of shade, and particularly in the context of climate change. And I'm also going to talk a little bit about the how by sharing our newest resource, the Shade Lookbook, which we worked on in partnership with Susan and her students from the School of Architecture and Landscape Architecture that provides guidance and recommendations for both natural and built shade. I think I mentioned, my name is Breann Corcoran. I am an environmental health and knowledge translation scientist with BC Centre for Disease Control. And prior to this, I worked with BC Cancer and led SunSafe BC, which is a provincial coalition of members working collaboratively to reduce UV radiation exposure among British Columbians. So this is a really nice topic that intersects both my past work in cancer prevention and my current work in climate change and climate change adaptation. And I also wanted to acknowledge that I am calling today and joining from the ancestral and unceded territories of the Coast Salish peoples, so the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations, here commonly known as Vancouver. And I'm grateful to be joining you all today. So in terms of what I'll be covering today, I'll be providing some background in terms of and context about UV radiation, extreme heat, and why shade is important. I'll be sharing some high-level results on a couple of BC Cancer-led research studies that were done in 2021 and 2023, which provide local evidence on the impact of shade on UV exposure, thermal comfort, and children's play behaviors. And then I'm excited to close with by introducing the Shade Lookbook, which we recently launched, and Susan will spend more time talking specifically about natural shade in her presentation later today. So I just wanted to begin with some context about sun safety here in BC. So in 2019, BC Cancer formed SunSafe BC, which is a provincial collaborative of partners from across health authority, foundation, nonprofit, academic, and patient partners listed here in that graphic. And this is just in the response to the need for greater collaboration and coordination among those working in sun safety, and also follow suit with what was being done in other provinces as well. The coalition is ongoing and is chaired by a medical health officer here in BC. And we do have a special focus on children and youth. And SunSafe BC recognizes the importance of shade as a key strategy for skin cancer prevention. And as you'll see here on the second image there, that it's been identified as a priority for 2 of the 4 action areas. And in 2021, we formed the Shade Working Group to advance this work and provide guidance on knowledge translation tools that, like the Shade Lookbook, which I'll be talking about later today. So now I wanted to talk about some of the health impacts of UV radiation and extreme heat, with a particular focus on children and youth because they are more vulnerable. So skin cancer is the most common form of cancer in Canada when you include both melanoma and non-melanoma forms of skin cancer. It currently affects 80,000 Canadians each year, and these rates continue to rise. And children are more vulnerable to UV radiation from the sun, making they're more predisposed to sunburn and skin damage. And severe sunburn during early childhood can lead to higher rates of melanoma later in life, with as few as 5 sunburns during childhood, doubling the risk for melanoma. And a large proportion of lifetime UV exposure occurs during childhood. Children and adolescents spend more time outdoors compared to adults. So, the early childhood period is a really critical time for skin cancer prevention. And also with heat. Children are more sensitive to the heat and more susceptible to heat-related illnesses like dehydration, heat stroke, and heat exhaustion. They have smaller bodies and are less efficient at regulating their body temperature compared to adults. So protecting children from heat-related illnesses and overexposure to the sun is becoming even more pressing now in the context of climate change and rising temperatures. So climate change, as I mentioned, is exacerbating these impacts. It's causing more extreme weather events like extreme heat, which we can expect to increase in frequency. And we know that climate change is affecting our health. just going to modify that. And children are particularly vulnerable to its effects. And the most direct health threats of climate change happen through hazards like extreme weather events like heat and flooding. And in 2021, here in BC, we were impacted by a record-setting heat dome. Here, most households in Greater Vancouver do not have access to air conditioning. And during that period, there was a 440% increase in community deaths during that event. Mean summertime temperatures are projected to increase across the entirety of Canada, and July and August temperatures across the southern half of Canada, where over 2/3 of our population lives, are expected to be 5 degrees warmer than they were at the turn of the century. So, and that's based on kind of current business as usual pathway. So, and as the temperature rises with climate change, we're also seeing, the induction of non-melanoma skin cancers by UV radiation increasing in human populations. And also cutaneous melanoma. There was a 2021 study done by Breann and colleagues that found that for every 2.5 degree rise in temperature, there was a 21% increase in cutaneous melanoma in any given region. And not only does extreme heat and too much sun exposure have direct negative health impacts, but it also hinders children's outdoor play experiences. We know that play is critical for healthy child development. It's in fact a child right. It offers a whole host of positive health, social, emotional, cognitive benefits. And above all, outdoor play, along with the risks that come with it, can bring many developmental benefits for children. And UNICEF states that currently only 1 child in every 5 plays enough. So without access to sun-safe and heat-resilient settings, especially with climate change, children will be further deprived of opportunities for outdoor play. And this can have, negative implications on children's play, by limiting their outdoor playtime, increasing the risk of heat-related illnesses and skin cancer, making outdoor environments uncomfortable and, unsafe for play, and reducing opportunity for quality play behaviors and social interaction. There was some work done by Health Canada and the Standards Council of Canada. And they had a team of experts conduct a review, and they found that there was a lack of sun-safe and thermally comfortable play spaces in Canada, and that existing design standards do not adequately consider sun safety and thermal comfort in their designs. Sorry. And then also there are, heat and shade inequities to consider when you look at the City of Vancouver's urban heat map pictured here. You'll note some major disparities with respect to urban heat across the City of Vancouver, with lower income neighborhoods having significantly higher urban heat. And this, there are also kind of similar disparities seen when you look at tree canopy cover with the City of Vancouver, some neighborhoods having less than 10% tree canopy cover compared with others with approximately 30%. So, children already struggle to get enough outdoor play, and with the increase in climate change events, we need strategies to mitigate the impact of heat and UV exposure on children so that they can spend longer outdoors playing and really thriving and developing. And there are some, benefits to consider with respect to shade as a mitigation strategy. It can potentially be more far-reaching and have a, while individual protection strategies are important, those social engineering can reach more people and have greater impact. So it allows for that. It also, can provide UV protection. Well-designed shade can offer up to 90% protection from UV radiation. And it also can have a cooling effect. Without the direct sun penetrating your skin, it can make you feel cooler. As well, natural shade can provide the benefit of evapotranspiration, which can, help cool the environment. And there are many other co-benefits of shade here listed, mitigating the urban heat island, reducing air pollution through natural shade, their energy savings. It can help mitigate climate change and then offer some cognitive, social, physical activity benefits as well. So now I'm just going to jump into some study results when we at BC Cancer looked at shade and its impact on UV exposure. A lot of research has been done in other parts of the world, in Australia, New Zealand, for example, but we didn't have a lot of data here in Vancouver. So in 2021, we led a research study to investigate the impacts of playground shade on UV exposure. And what we found was a 50% reduction in UV exposure among children studied, and this was consistent across the 3 seasons that we studied in fall, spring, and summer. And we had 21 children participate in this study, and the intervention involved 3 different shade sails pictured here, 2 kind of above an outdoor climber and 1 over an outdoor gathering space. And while this study offered good quantitative data across multiple seasons, it didn't paint the full picture, as researchers kind of anecdotally noticed changes in children's behaviors with and without the shade present. So just this past summer, we explored this in Cool Playgrounds 2.0, and we looked at the impact of playground shade in a childcare setting on thermal comfort and associated play behaviors. We used observational behavior mapping to study individual children for a period of 10 minutes and look at their play behaviors and spatial movements throughout the playground before and after a shade intervention. We used a validated tool called the Tool for Observing Play Outdoors, which was developed by Janet Lookbook and Agdina Cox, and we recorded play behaviors during that 10-minute observation period. And we also conducted some go-along interviews with the children, as well as focus groups with parents and educators. And what we found were some significant differences with respect to play behaviors with and without the shade. With the shade present, there was an 11% reduction in non-play behaviors, things like less self-care, less transitioning between play. Some examples of those reductions that we saw. We saw increases in physical play with shade, so more running, instances of running, jumping, and we also saw increases in exploratory and imaginative play, sensory play, object manipulation, make-believe play. Those types of play behaviors were recorded and increased with the shade present. We also saw thermal comfort improvements. So children reported feeling more thermally comfortable. And this was, we use visual prompts to assist with this. This is kind of corroborated by early childhood educator comments, with one noting, we try to go outdoors after nap time, but it's often too hot, so we come back inside and we have to try again later in the afternoon. Around 4:15, it's still hot, but more tolerable. We also saw more diversity in play locations with the shade present. So in this thermal image pictured here on the left, this is without the shade. We saw surface temperatures of the playground equipment reaching up to 56 degrees Celsius, whereas when we had the UV canopy net present, there was a 22. It was at 22, so a much cooler temperature. And what we saw in the spatial activity maps, and this is just an example of one individual child, but we saw them returning to the slide and being able to kind of play there and spend time at that play space. So now, I'm really pleased to introduce our Shade Lookbook, which is currently available on our BC Cancer website and a number of other locations as well. From the information we've gathered through our shade studies and literature reviews, the benefit of shade for climate adaptation, UV protection and heat mitigation, and quality outdoor play experiences is clear in building. So we designed the Shade Lookbook resource to support planners, designers, landscape architects, health professionals, and administrators of schools, for example, to consider shade and its many applications. This resource is available on our website. And it gives you a sample here of the table of contents, but outlines some guiding principles for well-designed shade, and then talks about different shade options, both natural and built, each with its own considerations around budget, maintenance, and care. And we tried to offer shade ideas for every budget, because we recognize that planting trees and installing shade can be expensive. So we also put together a list of different funding opportunities at the end of the resource. Also, as part of this, we provided guiding principles for well-designed shade, and really wanted to emphasize that not all shade is created equal. We talked about, the importance of natural shade and prioritizing it due to its co-benefits. The importance of conducting shade audit to really understand the site, the users, and the activities there when designing shade solutions. The importance of conducting solar analyses to really design for peak heat, typically between 2 to 6 p.m. here in Canada, as well as peak UV between 11 and 3, and also consider side protection. The importance of dappled light, and this is something we work closely with Susan's students on too, just the importance of integrating dappled light into shade solutions to enhance the aesthetic appeal. Often with natural shade, we see dappled light just naturally occurring, but even with built forms, there's opportunity to create dappled light too. Also with ground and play surfaces, so to consider ground and play surfaces to protect children from burns too, so placing it strategically with that in mind, as well as shade inequities, so considering heat and shade inequities when prioritizing our shade investments. The importance of planning for the long term. So for example, while installing built shade, it would be important to, perhaps consider putting up natural shade, and when the natural shade matures and can offer that UV protection and heat mitigation, that you can maybe remove the shade cells and repurpose them elsewhere. And then also the importance of co-design, collaborating with partners and community members. Here's just a quick look, and Susan's going to provide more detail in her presentation today, but this is an example of our natural shade lookbook section, which includes a list of 32 different trees, vines, and tall shrubs that offer significant canopy covers and UV protection and also grow well here in BC. Plants identified provide that kind of heavy or medium shade, are non-invasive, non-toxin, and they're available for sale in BC. Susan and her team worked really hard to identify plants that were native to BC, were listed as surviving Metro Vancouver's changing climate, and are listed in the BC Fire Smart Fire Resistant as a fire resistant plant. And then our built shade, here's an example of a built shade, but we offer 12 different options to consider along with pictures, and each example covers 4 different sections, so structure and design, installation and maintenance, application and benefits, and also cost and sustainability. And now with that, I'm going to turn it over to Susan to talk about natural shade. But I guess just in closing, I want to convey that, well-designed shade and community, schoolyard greening can not only mitigate against the harmful UV radiation and extreme heat, but also support quality outdoor play experiences for individuals and children and communities. And at the same time, support climate change adaptation planning. And collaboration between communities and policymakers is important to prioritize children's health in the face of climate change. And just want to do a special thank you to the UBC School of Architecture and Landscape Architecture, the UBC Outside Play Lab, and some of our other research partners like the City of Vancouver, as well as SunSafe BC and its Shade Working Group. Thank you, and I'll turn it over to you, Susan.
Great, thank you, Breann. I will try to get that. Can people see that? Great. Okay, thanks very much. Yeah, so I was invited by Breann to help out with the sort of natural shade in designing the Sun Lookbook. And so thank you, Breann, for inviting me along. We had a really interesting study. And I want to say special thanks to the 4 Master of Landscape Architecture students that assisted me in identifying trees, mainly the 33 trees, shrubs, and vines that are in the lookbook. But I'll take a few minutes just to talk about what exactly natural shade is. So it's shade produced by plant materials such as trees, shrubs, and vines. They have tons of benefits. They not only provide shade, but they contribute to ecosystems by providing habitat, food, and shelter for many species. They can help stabilize slopes and shorelines, and that can reduce soil erosion. We also know the mature trees can help mitigate climate change by absorbing carbon dioxide from the air and storing and releasing oxygen into the atmosphere. We also know that it can reduce air temperatures up to about 30%, which is pretty considerable. And this can help lower the heat island effect in urban areas. Oops. And also, once the trees get quite mature, they can cover entire buildings, and this can reduce your cost to mechanically cool your structure. So it has another added benefit financially. It also has tons of play values, which Breann spoke of, like climbing opportunities, using plant parts as play props. So play props are what we call the parts of the plant that children play with, that they'll put into buckets and make magic potions with, or just play a dramatic play with it. And they can also be used for arts and crafts projects. And also, I think because plants change over time, and many plants have unique smells and texture, they can spark curiosity and help identify patterns in the environment, which is sort of the building blocks of scientific thinking. So it has a lot of cognitive benefit as well. Plants offer unique cultural values and indigenous, historical, and their daily use in special events. So each plant often has a whole host of stories and myths attached to it that children and adults love to learn about. And really, the act of planting can bring people together. When you compare natural shade to built shade, it usually has a lower initial cost, but there'll probably be more maintenance. And also, natural shade has lower embodied energy, a calculation of all the energy that's used to produce the product, because a lot of the shade material for built shade has very highly processed material. And since it's organic, the disposal issues are relatively easier and more sustainable when compared to, all the kind of hard to recycle material built shade. But probably one of the most important aspects I like about shade is the dappled light that it gives. These patches of light and shadow that creates when sunlight passes through their leaves. And also, when the wind blows, it gives this sort of buoyancy to this feeling, like the whole space feels like it's alive. And Breann talked a lot about the really nice aesthetic effects of it, but there are also psychological effects. There's been studies that people prefer to be in under dappled light. And this is also correlates with mental restoration. So people feel more restored standing under a tree versus standing in shade. And I just like walk down my street just to show the difference. So here I am walking down the sidewalk, getting a beautiful dappled light from the trees. And I turn the corner and I'm now getting shade from the buildings. You can just tell there are two really different feelings looking down the street. Now there's also downsides with planting trees and other plants, particularly trees can interfere with infrastructure. So one of the things we note in the shade lookbook for natural shade is if it's a good street tree or not. This obviously was not a good street tree selection. They also have pollen, which can trigger allergies. And of course, some plants are toxic and invasive. And again, those are two things that we looked at specifically when picking these plants, that they were not toxic or invasive. Also, you don't want really deep shade, that 100%, because it's impossible often to grow things underneath it. So this is Norway maple, which is now considered invasive in Vancouver, but was planted a lot as street trees. And you'll notice if you see a tree, maple tree that's got dirt underneath it, it's probably a Norway maple because the shade is so heavy, nothing can grow beneath it. And then also plants take time to grow. And there's just a study over the span of a course, and some, like all living things, some will die and they will all eventually die at one point. And I think Breann spoke to the idea of, sort of, pairing this, if you need shade immediately, first put up a shade structure, but then also a plant. plant with trees, and that will be, you'll have a nice shady place in the future. Also, there's different shade emitted by the different trees, and a lot of that has to do with leaf size. You can see our maple trees with their big floppy leaves are great shade givers. Also, the canopy size you want to consider, the leafing out time, and the branching pattern can affect its shade. There's a lot of work out there on, locating shade, where it should go. If you're a professional, you probably have, a computer program. This was done in Rhino to calculate sun and shade on a site. If you don't have access to those kind of computer programs, you're looking, you can just document it in situ, because these modeling programs are models. You're going to get more accurate shade analysis doing it in situ, taking a photo with your phone and looking at it different times a day. How does the sun move across your yard? And oftentimes you get some of the hottest conditions is when you have these south facing structures with a lot of glazing that's just reflecting all that heat. This was interesting because this is one of the studies that Breann spoke of, where I had students install shade structures. And the ECE told us exactly where it was hot, and after they did all their computer analysis, that was exactly where it was. That's where all the heat was. And again, that can really be helped with things like overhead structures. We have vines in the shade lookbook that can grow. This is some fox grape. So if you're looking at a play space or any kind of recreational place, you really want to have about 70% coverage. You want to group the plants together. Low branching trees are going to be better than ones that are pruned up, or they grow that way naturally, because you're just going to get more shade on the ground, big wider swaths of shade. And when you plant, you want to see how big the canopies get and have those canopies touching, so you get this continuous coverage. And again, I think there's also a big role for shrubs. There's a lot of, this is a beautiful ocean stray, a native plant in BC, that have multiple stems and branching low from the ground that give you that similar kind of shade. There's a lot of climatic conditions when you're picking out plants for shade. This is the plant hardiness zones. You always need to look at that, because when you go to a nursery, you're going to need to look at what zone you're in to pick out the right plant. And so you can see we're at about 8. Also, there's tons of sort of micro conditions that affect light, wind, salt, fog, and moisture. They're shaped by orientation. Is it south facing? Is it north facing? Slope, nearby structures, and additional vegetation that already exists. So that is going to change the plant hardiness a bit. So it's also really good to pay attention to. So we looked at, in terms of trees, 3 types of trees: the broadleaf evergreens, the evergreen conifers, and then deciduous trees. I mean, it's interesting, a lot of the broadleaf evergreens you're going to see along the coast, but those are great because they stay with their leaves year round, providing lots of shade. We found a lot of the conifers were actually on BC Fire Smart's list of combustible, which you could, just witness that in the fires we've had in BC, and are probably best to avoid if you're in a fire prone area, even though they do provide shade year round. And then of course deciduous trees. And then there's some deciduous trees, like I think probably one of the best deciduous trees are oaks, because many varieties of oaks, their leaves stay on, all the way into late February. So this is a picture I took just earlier at the end of February of a pin oak that had kept its leaves on from 2023. So it's really an evergreen in some ways because it keeps its leaves, and again, providing that shade year round. So we looked at a number of different criteria. As Breann mentioned, we're trying to get to this heavy and medium shade, the non-invasive, non-toxic, and they were available for sale in BC. We also tried to identify plants that were native, that were listed as surviving Metro Vancouver's changing climate, and was listed as a BC Fire smart fire resistant plants. So we make note of those things. I also there's a lot of work done on natural shade and plants in Australia. And this was a study that sort of identified shade patterns of natural shade. So we were trying to get between medium and heavy shade being produced by trees. And so we sort of mimicked what they did, in which they took giant whiteboards and put them actually under the shade of trees. And we did this on the UBC campus as well as parts of Vancouver for trees we had identified through the research, and then took photos of that and then made computer generation images of it, which I can show you, to determine if it was what range it was in, if it was heavy, medium, or light. And then this is just a list of all the resources that we consulted and in coming up with these plants to use. And I think it's fair to say another thing we found was there's a lot about natural shade in terms of like where to locate a plant. But there's very little on like what type of tree is best for shade. And we were sort of surprised by that. So that's why we really put a focus on plant type, because anyone who's been to a nursery, they want to buy a plant, they'll realize like there's a myriad of plants to choose. So how are you going to know which one? And there are some websites where people talk about their favorite shade trees, but we try to be very systematic and just pick out ones that fell within these certain criteria and identified those, because we started with a list of about 100 plants. So this is what the shade book looks like when you get to the natural shade part. They're listed by alphabetical order based on their common name, because we figured most people are going to know what maple is, or they're going to know what a pine tree is. And so they're in alphabetical order, and you can see it's got its common name, its scientific name, the UV protection that it has. So it's either heavy or medium, the hardiness zone, so that gets back to the plant zone, the growth rate, the type of tree it is, the site conditions. So, this needs moist and well-drained soil, landscape uses, sorry. So if it's, this one's good for a native plant garden. But then we also talked about maintenance, the cultural values that goes into, particularly if they were native, they've a lot of plants that we've listed have certain uses historically and present day, and then ecological value. So obviously the deer and elk love the vine maple, and then the play value for children, and then a fun fact. And then you'll see at the graphic side that's below, we've got, a diagram that shows the tree, the size it'll probably be when you get it from the nursery, how big it will be after 5 years, and how big it will be, both its height and its width of its canopy after 10 years. So you can get a sense of how big this tree will get. And that again is going to shape its plant selection. And then we just took photos of the trees that we used in our study and used the whiteboard with, and then some details of some of the play value. And then to that is that patterning, and then the actual photo that the students took of the actual shade. So here's a ponderosa, a pine tree. Again, this is one of those trees we see a lot. You'll notice that if you ever go hiking, you'll see big chunks of bark on the ground. That means it's a ponderosa pine. That's how it's easy to identify. But again, just all the same type of information, but for a different type of tree. And again, there's also some shrubs listed. Here's the beautiful flowering currant, which is a native shrub. And then we have a vine here, so foxglove. So you can just, again, see the height that's going to be in the nursery, 10 years, and then 20 years we projected. So tons of information on these 33 different plants. And that's it. Thank you very much.